Hey everyone, Chris here from National Parents Organization, and today I'm here with Robert Garza, who has just an absolutely incredible story. He has had not the most pleasant story. 43 false CPS allegations, 12 years in family court, and $700,000, all to fight for time with his children. And he actually did something really positive with that. He went out and got this law passed in Texas, where basically parents can get time back with their children, and he's here to tell us about that today. So, Robert, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so it's been quite a journey. The reason I even started it was because when I was in family court, and every time they took my time away from on a precaution, and that's kind of what happens with these false allegations. They're actually violating your Fifth Amendment right for due process, your 14th Amendment right for care, custody, and control. And so every time we asked the judge for the time back, and the judge always gave the time, I mean, the children back. But when we asked for the time back, they never gave it back. They just said, well, it's water under the bridge. Let's just move forward. So after 14 years of this, and my judge got tired of me asking, she finally said, okay, we'll save it for final trial. That came 10, 11 years later. And still, she never even ruled on it. But what SB 718 does in Texas, so I could have spent, and this is a thing to all the parents too, I could have spent more time overturning the judge's decision in an appellate court, and I had a really good case. But instead of doing that, I just went forward, went to my state senator, submitted a bill called Time Taken, Time Back, and it took the incentivization out of making the false allegation. And so whenever they return the child, they return the time. And that's essentially what it does.
And is it a one for one time return on that? How does that work?
Yeah, so the bill's amazing. It actually gives the same amount of time that was taken given back to the parent and the same type of time. So if you got your weekends taken away, then that you would get your weekends back. So same thing with Christmas, spring break. They hijack those, then they're going to miss two in a row.
So this is what triggers the time back? Is it when the other party makes a false allegation, or is it just how does that work?
Every time that my ex would do this, what would she would do is do it by proxy. Never once did my ex make a false allegation directly to the court. She always did it by proxy. So she went to a mandatory reporter, teacher, therapist, even her own attorneys got involved in this when they ran out of people. Mandatory reporters also are attorneys. And so when they would make a false allegation by proxy, the mandatory reporter would report to CPS. CPS thought they were doing the right thing, and they would follow up with it and open up an investigation. And when they did that, the court thought they were doing the right thing because my ex would run to court, get a protective order, restraining order, and 100% of the time, the courts would award it. And that's what would trigger it.
So I mean, this happened a number of times. Was it the same judge every time? And was it the same CPS people? Did they? I mean, did they not wise up to this little shenanigan that was going on?
So they did after a while. It started in Dallas County. And when Dallas County and the judge figured it out, she got reprimanded big time. She got a travel provision that given her in the divorce taken away from her. She had a global restriction. She started and after that, she quit. Well, 6 months later, she moved it to a different county and started it all over again. The problem with this is that when you're in different counties, that CPS is a totally different CPS. They do their own investigation, and to get those records, it's just a whole mess. And so they had to start all over again. Different judges, different everything. So
So she really just found a loophole in the system by changing venues. Then.
correct. And if you think about this, it's a very conniving way to do this. If you really believe that your child was being abused as a parent, I would call CPS myself, not go through a third party proxy. And so that was the telltale thing. The problem is that CPS records are redacted. So even if you get them, you won't know who did it or what they said. Only a judge and a social study can get those unredacted. Then you have to file to get those records from the once the social study is done, then you have to get those back. And then that's how we found out how it was done.
Yeah, so it's a big long process, and probably one that not a lot
Right.
of people are going to go through, right? To really be able to find out the truth. I mean, was there any civil recourse for you in this case? I mean, it just seems like this is a classic case of harassment or a number of other things. I mean, could you have gone after her civilly?
Yes, and as political and as high conflict as the case was, I have a lot of lawyers that want to sue her, but it is the mother of my children. I know she did this, but if you read into like the diagnosis for parental alienation or even the behaviors or anything like that, you understand it's more of a mental thing. And so I think therapy would probably do something. So when I came out with my bill, instead of again trying to overturn my case, I just took our kids out of family court and I dropped the rope. So a lot of the times the kids are like, "Hey, I have a wrestling match. I have this." I'm like, "Hey, you know what? Have your mom do it. Whatever. We'll both do it. Like whatever you're comfortable with." I dropped the rope. I really didn't go along with the decree unless now I did that. She didn't, on the other hand. And so it made it kind of hard, but what would I normally do as a parent? That's I'm not going to let someone change my heart. And unless we had something planned like a spring break or something, then that's when they came over. Like, that was hard set in stone.
So tell me a little bit about getting the law passed. I know that getting shared parenting laws passed is often met with a lot of resistance by, domestic violence groups and attorneys and things like that. Did you have the same sort of resistance, with this law?
So my bill's very pretty when it was written. And so I made it very simple that whenever you go through an allegation that has to do with CPS and they rule it out, then that parent and child get their time back to repair the parental bond that was taken only by precaution. Now, as a senator or a House rep, when you hear that when all the allegations are ruled out and they're giving the child back, who's going to raise their hand to not give that child their time back? Now, I could have retroed it and included me and my case in it, and I would have got 3.5 years back with my children. But I didn't do that because that would, I think, cause a sticking point and it would actually stop up the courts, which I was trying to undo. I wanted to unstop the courts, unstop CPS, and unstop the district attorney's office. This law is like almost an atomic bomb to the system because when you take away the incentivization out of making the false allegation in the first place, in my case, the real detriment was to my children, yes, but also if I was being investigated 43 times falsely, that means CPS took away those resources from children really being hurt. And because the severity of the allegation, it also included another investigation by the district attorney's office, not only in Dallas County, but Collin County. So 3 investigative agencies investigating false allegations just to take time away. That's why this bill is like an atomic bomb. It returns those resources back to those agencies.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So it not only helps out the parents, it also helps out the state and the agencies then.
Correct. And CPS, I don't know if you know this, but CPS, all out of all CPS investigations, only 15 to 18% are able to determine. That means the rest of them are something else, but only 15 to 18%. And the sad part is when you call CPS, the first thing they ask you is the parent or family you're talking about in family court. That's one of the first questions they ask you, which is crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, it doesn't sound like the bill has anything that's punitive other than the returning of the time. I mean, it doesn't punish the person for making the false allegations. It really just takes away their incentive, right?
Correct. And I thought about putting what you're talking about, like something there to not only deter the parent, but uh, have them like have jail time or a fine or something like that. But I took that out too, or didn't even put it in the first place because no state senator or House rep or anyone is going to pass a bill that deters someone from reporting a child being hurt. So if I was a neighbor and I knew a child was being hurt and I reported it, I could be getting in trouble if the bill had repercussions. I could have got a $500 fine for reporting my neighbor if it wasn't true. And so no person is going to pass that bill. And so I made it very pretty. There's no repercussion other than taking away the incentivization. And at the same time, it will not stop someone from making a report. So children really being hurt are still going to get reported. Now, it will stop false allegations. It will not stop a real allegation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and it's low key genius, right? Because you've basically broken down the barriers for anybody that's a politician or a lawyer, and really presented them a case that they can't say no to.
Correct. And I think that's what bills should be written as. And I hope a lot of people pay attention to this. If you have a problem, like, and you know about parental alienation, a bunch of other stuff, or even gatekeeping or any of that, or bad mouthing, or even how bad family court is, you should not go to your state senator or house rep to tell them about this stuff, only if you have a solution to it. So I know you, and I talk to parents all the time. I'm like, okay, they tell me all this stuff. I'm like, okay, so what's your solution? Well, I don't know. I was just telling you the problem. I'm like, you cannot do this. They have things that they need to get done too. And they do get tired of parents going and emotionally throwing up on them. And it makes it to where they don't want to hear this stuff. So unless you have a solution for it, don't do it, and talk to your peers or a therapist about that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to ask, and tell me if you don't want to go into this at all, but 43 times the CPS contacting you saying, "Oh, there's been this allegation," and I mean, I would think after like the third or fourth time, you've got it pretty much down to a science. You're like, okay, here we go again, and here's the other times that it's happened. I mean, how did that work after a while?
So the sad part is CPS has a big turnover rate. And so you get different investigators, different counties, different judges. Some sit in, some aren't there. They would cherry pick stuff. They would go to judges that were sitting with a emergency protective order, restraining order. That way you weren't seeing the same judge every time. So it was different judges not knowing what was going on. CPS thought they were doing the right thing by going through it. The judges thought they were doing the right thing by keeping you from it. The only person that only knew this was my ex and what they were doing. Now, I think this is good for the viewers too, is that if you're going through something like this, your biggest argument to this, and a lot of lawyers don't know how to fight this, is that you tell them, look, I was married for 6 years to this woman or man, and for 6 years, there was never any police involvement. There was never any CPS involvement. Now, all of a sudden, I file for divorce, and all of a sudden now I'm a monster and molester or whatever else, or abuser. If you are, you are, and if you aren't, you aren't. And so there has to be a track record there.
It's just incredible. Do you think there needs to be reform within CPS in the states where they need to be better connected, the left hand talking to the right hand kind of thing?
I think, and I wrote this out. I posted on my timeline. So I'm also part of Texans for Judicial Accountability. It's with Jennifer Lundy. And so we look to reform judicial accountability. And one of the things is cameras in the courtroom. That is huge. That will stop a lot of these games because no judge wants to end up on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Two would be equal 50-50 shared parenting. So equality upon divorce, if you're fit, willing, and able, and live within, 20 miles of each other. Now, Senator Paxton and I are looking at issuing or submitting a bill this session in Texas for a new start at equality. And if you think about it, it's not even probably, the bill, if you do equality in any state, is actually the biggest civil rights movement for that state since the civil rights. And it affects every man, woman, child, race, color, and creed. So these are huge bills that are going through that people are just like, it's a bunch of crying dads that don't want to pay child support. Our bill has nothing to do with child support. It only has to do with possession and equality.
Yeah, I think you hit a really good point there. I think the equality term is really the one that people are going to latch onto emotionally, right? Because, um, like you said, I've pointed this out before with other guests on here. It's funny how If you go to the state house and you're a dad, then you can get dismissed because hey, you're just an angry dad. But an angry mom goes to the state house about anything, and and there's almost immediate action. It's a huge double standard in our society. And so I think you're right. Talking about it differently is really what it's going to take to succeed.
Yeah, you really can't. And I tell people this too. You can't really call your bills or talk about 50-50 shared parenting or anything like that. It sounds pretty, don't get me wrong, but I think you need to make it a new start is at equality. At that point, they can't really argue with it. If you're fit, willing, well, put it this way, if you're a joint managing conservator in the United States of America, then the court has already granted you as a fit parent. So now that the court's already, if you're a joint managing conservator, you're a fit parent. So now you need to be willing and able, and that's it, and live within 20 miles.
Yeah, I mean, it really simplifies it quite a bit. When you put it like that.
Correct. And that's how it needs to be. Now, I know a lot of people want to put more markers in there and be like, oh, well, we need preponderance of evidence and this and that. You have to pass the baton off. You're not going to get everything all at once. Same thing with my bill. It had to do with CPS. That's what I went through. I wanted to stop the bleeding, but I wanted to put in there at first all investigative agencies. So if the police department was investigating you, the
Mm-hmm.
DA, all these other stuff, all these other agencies, it was too broad. So I broke it down to the biggest component, which was CPS, and that would return all of the agencies a lot of their resources.
So, have you seen any other states try and pick this up and do the same law? What's the motion been like nationwide? And I understand you've got a push to do this on a federal level.
Yes. So I went to Washington, D.C. also to talk to John Cornyn's office and Ted Cruz and tried to push this on a federal level since they are violating your Fifth Amendment right and your 14th Amendment right. So because your constitutional rights are being violated, this is actually a good federal bill. It's very pretty. It could go in all states. They wanted to see several states started carrying the bill. And then I also had to talk to a couple of, I guess, some of their other agencies to be able to school them on what or educate them on what's going on and how this works. But they were very interested in it. And now New Hampshire is since then passing my bill through their legislation. A bunch of other states are. Now, what I have seen is that if they would just put my bill through as it is, then it would pass very easy. They're attaching other things to it, which it's okay. I get it. But when you're doing that, you're muddying the waters, kind of like if I would have retroed it. It sounds like I could have done it, but I didn't want to chance it. And a lot of legislators would love to take the bill because Texas is one of the biggest states and it went through bipartisan and unanimous. So, and on the first time, a lot of legislators would love a bill like that because there's no downfall to it. And, it would be an easy bill to pass.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, what impact has it had on Texas? I understand. Was it September of 2023 when it passed, and when did it go in law? And what's it doing so far since then?
Yeah. So the journey for the bill was amazing. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on here in Texas, and so we were worried it wasn't going to go through. Um, but it ended up passing. Now, at the end of it, the governor could have vetoed it or passed it or just not signed off on it, and it still would have went through. He signed off, and it was the most amazing thing. I got a call from my state senator's office, and they said, "Look, Robert, I know today's a weekend or whatever, but the governor just signed off on your bill on Father's Day." And I was like, wow, like that was huge. Sorry, it kind of makes me tear up just thinking about it, but it was a gift to all fathers and parents and children. And it just happened to fall on that day. So I thought it was amazing.
That's absolutely incredible. And what's the feedback been? Have you heard
Yeah.
from CPS or lawyers or judges? What are they saying about it? And how? I mean, are they following this? Because one thing we've seen is sure parenting bills get passed, and then sometimes judges don't even follow those. Are they following this law now in Texas?
Yes. In fact, I was at a continuing education for lawyers and judges. They're called CLE classes. And I joined one, sat in on one because they were talking about all the new bills. And when they got to mine, they talked about it. It was like a dream. It was kind of strange, but there was 20 something lawyers in there, somewhere around there. And at the end of it, they had me stand up and talk about my bill. And so I was able to educate the lawyers and judges. And this was, I think, one of the biggest monumental things and ideas that if we can get in these classes as advocates and talk about these things, you'd be surprised. I was blown away on how much the lawyers and judges wanted something like this. They're like, finally, we have something, that will combat, what's going on. And then they had a couple of questions about about the time back and would it be 1 for 1 or whatever else. And so that was neat to explain it to lawyers and judges, because I was like, look, yeah, if they take your first, third, and fifths, it's not like if they take 30 days, you get 30 days back. They're not taking 30 days in a row. They're taking your first, third, and fifth weekends and Thursdays. So then when you get the child back, you're actually getting first, second, third, fourth, fifth, first, second, third, fourth, fifth every Thursday and probably every Wednesday until you get that time back. So that was interesting to explain too. But it
Yeah,
was a great feedback from all of them.
that must have been such a weird feeling to be in front of that crowd and explaining it to him, almost like a dream come true, I'm sure.
It was amazing because I had talked about it with a bunch of advocates before that we should start figuring out how to get like We the Parents, the movie that just came out, or the documentary by Elizabeth and McNeese and their team. But if we could get more things like that into the CLE classes for continuing education for judges and lawyers, it would revolutionize this whole movement very fast. The other thing we're doing is, again, for Texans for judicial accountability, we were just talking to a couple of Supreme Court justices here in Texas about all the stuff that's going on, and some of them are even on our panels for this We the Parents when we go discuss stuff. And so they're the courts that you appeal your case to after the lower courts don't do justice, and they're the ones that overturn it, and no judge wants to be overturned. So if they're seeing us speak to these higher level courts, then they're going to be worried that their stuff is going to be overturned very fast, and it'll just trickle down very quick. It almost corrects itself.
That's really interesting. Do you have any, tips or suggestions on how advocates can get involved with the CLE classes? Because I've looked at that in the past, and it looks like that's a fairly closed community.
It's a very tight niche group, and if I don't think a regular person can get in those classes. I just happened to change the law in it and happened to be there at the right time, right place, and was able to speak. They invited me to speak, so that was really good. The person that put on the class, when he found out that I was there, if you can just take the bills that are already done, like the time taken, time back, and put them through, that alone in your state will fix a lot of things by itself. Cameras in the courtroom, try to get your state senators and House reps to do that. You're already on camera as soon as you walk in that courtroom because it's there to protect the judges. There's a couple of states, I think, that have cameras in the courtroom. When you walk out, they give you a CD of your proceedings, whatever. And if they say, well, there's privacy laws, whatever, around kids, there is. And so all they have to do is make it not available to the general public. If they want to sit in on it, then the courts are open and shall remain open. That's a law. But as far as recording it goes, the courts can record it, but only give the parents or the litigants the CD. That solves that case pretty easy. There's a lot of these laws that I think that are about to be updated because I don't think people are thinking about them in the right way. If you can frame a law in such a way that it cannot be disputed, that's what you need to start doing.
That makes so much sense. Well, we've covered quite a bit of ground in a short amount of time here. Is there anything else you wanted to cover in our talk today?
There's a new, Claudio Valles did a bill here in Texas. I think it was HB 969. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's House Bill 969. And House Rep Cook put it through, and it's to when a police officer goes out for a call, when it's interference with child custody, that police officer usually says it's a civil matter, can't do anything about it. Well, because of this law, it's up to a $500 fine, and they can actually issue the parent that's interfering with it that fine. Well, that'll correct a lot of things. The problem was in Texas, it has to be adopted by the city. So it has to become a city ordinance, and you have to go to the city council for it. I went to one city here in Texas and sat in for 4 or 5 hours on a city council meeting with the mayor, the sheriff, everything. It's not easy. So then I went to another county and did a different approach. I went to the Department of Public Safety and talked to their legislative office. Now, they were super interested in it. This is the only type of weapon that the law enforcement have against withholding a child. They usually say it's a civil matter. With this bill, they'll just write them a $500 fine. And they thought it was genius. And so what they're going to end up doing is public safety is taking a hold of it, and they're going to ask the city to adopt it. And once this goes, it'll be amazing because it's one of the largest cities in Texas. And so this session, this next coming session, I already talked to my state senator. We're going to take that same bill and run it through, but there's a couple of things we need to change, like from may to shall, and give it a set fine instead of $0 to $500 fine, and then it can become a law. So Claudia did a great job of doing what she did, because she did, like I said, it's a track race, and then you pass the baton off and the next person picks it up and gets more and more and more and that's what all advocates should do. And, I don't know if it would have passed had she went for it to pass with a fine and whatever, but she did it in such a way that it did pass. And so now we're picking up the baton and making it to go to all 1,200 cities in Texas next session.
Well, that's amazing, and it's such a good point, right? Like this advocacy thing is definitely a baton race where you do a little bit and then pass it on, and then maybe you pick it up again later on. But it's definitely not all done by one person. That's such a good analogy.
Correct. Yeah, like a lot of the advocates in the shared parenting movement, they've done a lot of the work. They've researched, they've educated, they've done all these things. The problem is they're trying to get everything compacted into one. They want the child support in there. They want the whole kit and caboodle in there. And I get it. I totally get it. But you have to keep moving the baton, because we've already lost 3 or 4 sessions that the baton, the marker never moved. Well, actually I am. I'm a father that is paying child support to a multimillionaire. I rather do that than be in court and not see my kids. And so you have to think of it. Would you rather have 50-50 parenting and pay child support, or have standard possession and still pay child support? Pass the baton off. Get the new start at equality, pay your child support, and then the next session just keep moving the baton. But show them you're not a bunch of crime fathers. You're a bunch of fathers and parents that want to be in your children's life. It's a $60 billion industry. That's not a bunch of fathers and mothers that don't want to pay child support. You're wanting to see your children.
Yeah, the argument that you're just angry, and and it's like, well, if I was just angry, I wouldn't spend all this effort trying to change things, right? That argument has always kind of bothered me. Well, Robert, thank you so much for coming on today. This has been a great talk, and I'm so sorry that you had to go through this initially, but it sounds like you've really taken sort of the worst of the worst and turned it into a best case scenario, and really done something that is going to be meaningful for a lot of families moving forward. And we will go ahead and put links to all this stuff, to the bill, to the text of the bill, if somebody wants to take that in their state and try and pass it as is. We'll put that in there. Is there any way people can contact you or get in touch with you after this?
Yeah, if you can just follow me on Facebook. I don't do a lot of different social medias other than Facebook, because I'm spending too much time trying to do all the advocacy, and it's not just in Texas, it's on a national level and in every state. Um, yeah, yeah. The other thing I wish all the advocates would do is just, do your part and talk to your state senator and House rep about these bills that have been passed in different states. And I think it will turn your pain into purpose, like I did mine.
Well, that's fantastic, and thank you so much for coming on today. And we'll put links to again to the bill and to your Facebook page in the notes here. and that way you can get a hold of Robert if you want to. And thanks again for coming on, and thank you for all the work that you're doing for families around the country.
Thank you, Chris.